Hello out there in Nostalgia Land. I'm Chuck Schaden, and today we're going to look at the golden age of radio. Not the old-time radio shows, but more the old-time radios themselves, the receivers, the boxes that brought us so many of those good old radio shows. We're going to the Antique Radio Club of Illinois Fest in Elgin, Illinois, where collectors come from all over the country to buy and sell and trade and share their interest in old-time radio receivers. Then we're going to Dr. Ralph Muckow's Antique Radio Museum, also in Elgin, where you're going to see a fantastic collection of all kinds of radios from the very early days through the post-war years. So come along with us for an hour of nostalgia. Stick around, we'll be right back. Don't touch that channel.
If you're looking for the super combination, super brands at super prices, come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances. It's spectacular. It's Townhouse's all-out rollout sale. Trainloads and truckloads of major appliances, color TVs, and VCRs are now arriving with the greatest selections and savings of the year. This week, save big on famous Tappan self-cleaning gas ranges. Don't miss it. Sale now in progress.
Come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances, Milwaukee and Oakton.
You'll find a generous helping of memories from and about the good old days at Metro Golden Memories in Chicago. We have a complete selection of records and cassette tapes from the fabulous big band era, plus thousands of personality recordings by your favorite singers. We offer a gigantic collection of books about the movies and the stars from those wonderful days of not so long ago. At Metro Golden Memories, you'll find a marvelous collection of celebrity statues, plus our famous Maltese Falcon replica, the Oscar look-alike, even Little Nipper the RCA dog. Hundreds of old-time radio shows on record and tape. And lots of books about radio and television, too. Posters of your favorite movies and movie stars. And videotapes of the classic films from Hollywood's golden age. Hundreds in stock for sale or rent. All this and more at Metro Golden Memories, 5425 West Addison, just 2 miles west of the Kennedy Expressway in Chicago. Open 7 days a week, Monday through Saturday from 10 to 6, Sunday from noon to 5. Come in and browse.
We're at the Antique Radio Club of Illinois RadioFest 1986, and this is the midway, if you will, at the Holiday Inn in Elgin, Illinois, where scores and scores of collectors have come to show their wares, to trade some of their radios and radio receivers and related memorabilia. And this is all put on by, as I said, the Antique Radio Club of Illinois. And we're speaking with Joe Willis, who is the president, the chairman of the board, the chief cook and bottle washer, and the gopher of this club. Joe, where did all of this begin?
Well, it began in 1979 when the Antique Radio Club of America held their national conference here in Elgin. And I began looking around the flea market, and there were many prominent collectors here, all from Illinois, but there was no club. So with the help of Barry Janoff, in the winter of 1979, we sent out 55 invitations, and we announced an organizational meeting to be held February 16th, 1980. The weather that night was 17 below zero with a wind of 30 miles an hour and icy roads. We came down to the Holiday Inn. We said, will anybody show up? Well, 55 people showed up. We organized the meet. We had a little room with some snacks in it. We said, hey, anybody wants to come down and talk about radios can come on down. That was at 9 o'clock that night. At 5 o'clock the next morning, somebody says, hey, there's a flea market and we better go to it. And that was the start of the Antique Radio Club of Illinois.
Well, now you're quite a few years beyond that. How many people do you expect at a meet like this today?
This will be the biggest meet that we've ever had, and we're anticipating 700 to 800 people from all across the country. Literally from California to New York, from the tip of Maine through Texas, Oklahoma, all over the country have convened here. Many of them arriving as early as Tuesday morning.
Well, why do people get together like this? Why do they want to trade and swap and sell these old radios? Why do they do this?
To many, it's a social affair. It's a gathering of the clan. Radio collecting as such is still in its infancy. There are not a lot of collectors across the country. We're talking maybe 3,000 to 4,000. And there is a need, due to the lack of major quality meets, for these people to get together to enjoy the various displays, the various programs we present. We hold auctions, we hold how-to sessions. For instance, this year, the theme of the convention is television, the early years. And we have a fantastic display of early televisions. So there's a need for these people to convene to talk about their various problems.
Well, why are you getting into television? If you say there's just radio collecting is in its infancy, now you're going into television, you think, are you changing along with like the whole media scene?
Well, when I say radio collecting, our club charter said that the club was interested in the collection of communication equipment. This broadened it out into such fields as television, telegraph equipment, tubes, advertising, magazines, radios, even phonographs, the whole spectrum of this thing that we call broadcast communication. And in recent years, there has been a very big surge in the interest of televisions. I don't know exactly why, but you will see many of these out here today at very premium prices. In our field, as in any collector's field, there tend to be fads and trends. And right now, the trend is toward television.
Do you have to have a large collection of radios or television sets to be a member of this club?
Oh, heavens no. You know, the backbone of any club, I believe, is that collector who has one or two pieces that he prizes dearly, be it one television or the classic Cathedral or the battery set, the Zenith, the Atwater Kent. We encourage people of that ilk to come here because they are the people who are going to learn. They're really, again, the backbone and the force behind the club. We have collectors in our club who have one radio, all the way up to Ralph Muckow, who has like 3,000 or 4,000 radios. And we encourage everybody to attend. We want to make this a family affair. We want to get the whole family involved in the collecting field.
Now, Joe, you mentioned that you have some kind of sessions about learning about radios and tubes and things like that. What kind of sessions actually do you have here? Do they learn about repairing radios? What are they?
We have sessions on how to refinish a radio cabinet and make it look like it did in the factory. And I might add that many of these sets that you see at flea markets with the high glossy finish, they didn't come out of the factory that way. Remember, it was 1922, 23, 24, and the factories were primitive, and these sets got dropped and the finishes became bad on them. So when people see these at a flea market, they see a high gloss, that wasn't a factory finish. Somebody applied it. It looks neat, but it isn't original. So they learn how to apply that factory finish. They learn about early radio pioneers. And I dare say that, for instance, Reginald Aubrey Fessenden, not really a household name, but without Reginald Aubrey Fessenden, we wouldn't be standing here. He was truly the father of communication. We all know about Marconi. The difference is Marconi would take your idea and expand on it. Fessenden would create the idea and expand on it. So we have sessions with what we call unknown radio pioneers. We also may have a session on a manufacturer such as Atwater Kent and his era of radio and what he was trying to accomplish. Powell Crosley is another fine one. Crosley was into many things other than radios, as you well know, cars, refrigerators, all types of appliances. We will do one on tubes. We will have a tube expert come in and talk about the development of the RCA Corporation and their tubes. And we have many avenues. Magazines, the ads, what were these publications trying to project to the public, to the retailer? What were the trends of that era? And we will do a session on magazines and advertising. Car radios, we'll go to the bizarre things, anything in that big, broad communication field. Military equipment, radios that won World War II, for instance, the Hallicrafters series, when they were available in London for $5 and $6, and those were the sets that jammed the V2 and the V1 buzz bombs. And they bought them out of the stores in London during the war. So we'll do sessions on interesting things like that.
Well, you really certainly seem to have a very broad scope of things, and just as the man who expanded on the ideas, you've certainly done that too with the Antique Radio Club of Illinois. A lot of people here today, and people who want to join this club, who want to know more about it, who were not here today but who would like to get some more information, where do they write?
Okay, you can write me at Joe Willis, W-I-L-L-I-S, P.O. Box 14732. That's Chicago, Illinois, 60614. You'll get a prompt reply from me within a few days.
If you're looking for the super combination, super brands at super prices, come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances. It's spectacular. It's Townhouse's all-out rollout sale. Trainloads and truckloads of major appliances, color TVs, and VCRs are now arriving with the greatest selections and savings of the year. This week, see a spectacular galaxy of savings on all white Westinghouse appliances. Don't miss it. Sale now in progress.
Come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances, Milwaukee and Oakton.
At one small step for man.
Share the experience.
The candidates need
and
to
unlock the memories at Chicago's Museum of Broadcast Communications.
Of the Mercury Theater and for the latest local results.
Celebrating the very best in radio, television, and advertising. For membership information, call 565-1950. Chicago's new Museum of Broadcast Communications. Come, share the experience.
Now we're going to talk with one of the most prolific collectors of antique radios. He's an old friend of ours by the name of Bert Katz. Bert, when did you first start collecting these old antique beauties?
Well, Chuck, I started collecting about 15 years ago now, and been having a lot of fun over the years doing it. Yeah.
What kind of radios do you look for in your collection?
Well, I'm getting pretty much particular. When I first started collecting, I took about anything that looked old. Over the years, though, because of a space problem and what have you, and places to put them, it necessitates kind of narrowing yourself down, specializing a little more, which I've done over the years now, and I'm primarily into the very, very early equipment, let's say, pre-1921, 22.
What kind of equipment is that, pre-1921 or 22?
You're bordering at that point on anything before 1920 on somewhat almost experimental or extremely rare pieces that were put out. It was the beginning of radio transmission for the public.
Mm-hmm. Now, someone who is interested in old radios but doesn't know much about collecting, how do they go about finding a radio that they would like to add to a collection and another one and another and another?
Well, first of all, would be to join an organization that's involved in it. They do have newsletters. They have different types of meets and what have you, where they can become familiar with what's available, general area of pricing, and just get immersed somewhat into it. Second place to be able to find radios, I guess if someone wanted to, we follow the antique columns in the local newspapers. And before you were to buy, I'd say check them out and get really an idea what prices are. And a third way, of course, would be to talk to someone that's been in it for a while and give you a ballpark idea of rarity of a radio and some idea of a pricing area before you get into it. It's always best to check out as much as you can.
So this is a good place to start, though, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. They've got things here for the novice collector, the chap that wants a radio that's got 2 or 3 of them, or for the advanced collector. The advanced collector may not find exceedingly rare piece out here, but he can sure make a lot of connections to the availability of them with people that are here that have them at home. Sure.
Which of the radios, now I know you're into this very early radio equipment, but which of the radios cosmetically do you think are the most interesting?
Once again, I'm in the very, very early radios. What seems to be somewhat a vogue situation right now is a lot of the Art Deco items from the 1932, 33, probably up to the latter part of the 30s. The radios that have mirrors on them, radios that have designs on them, such as a Mickey Mouse radio, a novelty type of radio, a radio with the Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs on them and what have you, seem to be very appealing at this time.
And I suppose very hard to find, too.
Hard to find, and the prices are creeping up on them because there is a desirability at this time for them, yes.
You touched on something that is a very big problem for people who collect radios, and that's space. You know, if you're a coin collector or a stamp collector, you've got a couple of books and a couple of boxes, and that's it. But with radios, especially the console radios, you can run out of space in a hurry. What does a collector do?
Well, that's what I'm saying. After he starts to collect a while, he does become more discerning in what he's going to pick up because space somewhat forces him into this. And some of the earlier items he picked up, as he specializes more, he will sell those to newer collectors or people that have the interest along those lines. And he will start specializing into his area and making room by selling off some of the earlier items he had picked up.
And upgrading those radios as well.
Upgrading, yes, time. Yes. This is part of the collecting syndrome.
After a while, it becomes quality rather than quantity.
Yeah, I think you will see this if you talk to any of the collectors around here that have been at it for 3-4 years or more. Yeah, you'll find this.
And that's why collecting radios and becoming a member of this kind of an organization is a must, because that's where you can find buyers for the radios you want and maybe find some of the beauties that you're looking for.
True. It's a super outlet for it, and the people you meet and the people you run across, it's a lot of fun hobby. It's a lot of fun involved in it, sure.
We've seen a lot of radio receivers here today, but I found a radio sender. This is Paul Crum, who was an engineer with WGN Radio for How many years, Paul?
For about 38 years, Chuck.
Going back as far as when?
I began in 1936. 1936 when they were at the so-called Nathan Hale Court alongside the Tribune Tower.
That's where they are back again now.
They are. They've been there a few days now. Just come back home, I guess one would say there.
Well, you, as an engineer with WGN back in those golden days, you must have had a lot of interesting experiences. Did you work any of the... I bet you worked some of the remotes, huh? The band remotes?
When a new man started in, and of course I started in as a new man in 36, we did almost altogether remotes. We handled the dance bands from the hotels, the nightclubs, and the other places more colloquially and less officially known, you know, the places we broadcast from.
So you did a lot of studio work as well then, didn't you?
Well, yes. In fact, you might say I've done everything and eventually went on to television, which frankly I didn't like. No, I shouldn't have said that because here we are on video.
Well, that's all right. You like television, you like radio. What was the best time for you as an engineer on radio?
Oh, that would be extremely difficult to say because, frankly, you might say I wasn't as technically oriented, although I shouldn't say that, as I was people-oriented. And I liked those persons that I liked to work with and the things that we did, including covering national political conventions and those things, which, of course, we have along the road.
Sure. Now, you told me before we started talking here for the camera that you had worked with Franklin McCormick for some time.
I spent several years with him, yes, on the late night period there that Franklin was on.
The all-night showcase. Huh?
Yes, in fact, I happened to be away the night that he had his fatal attack there. Otherwise, I would have been there at the time that he had.
And when did you retire from WGN?
In 1974.
And you still can't get away from radio, though, can you? Because you're here with the Antique Radio Club, and you've got a bunch of very interesting wares to sell here, too, right?
Well, I often say that I'm one of the fellows who slapped the baby radio on the bottom when it was born, you know, and brought it into life. And I do go back to most primitive times, long before your history of the history and the tremendous history you have of broadcasting in later years. When we had the individual stations, when we had the crackpots, the cancer cures, the phony preachers, and all those persons, you know, at those times. So I went back to that, and I think those were probably some of the most interesting times that we did have.
I think you had a good time with radio, didn't you?
I lived, as someone said the other day, in the golden age of radio.
Yeah, well, you're one of the guys that made it golden. Where you have antique radios, you're bound to have some antique microphones. And we're talking with Bob Paquette, who is one of the foremost collectors of antique microphones in the country. Bob, how are you today?
Fine, and you?
I'm pretty good, and we're glad to see you here. You've got a fantastic collection of antique microphones, don't you?
Yes, it's about 30 years worth or so.
30 years worth, and how many microphones are there in that collection?
A little over 800.
A little over 800. We have just a couple of them with us here. This is not an antique. This is our regular microphone, but I have here one of the most famous of the old microphones. What microphone is this?
It's an RCA ribbon. Came out in '31 and was used for all the early radio broadcasts. It was popular because it was bidirectional. You could work both sides of the microphone. And so it was very convenient for radio shows.
With a script in hand, you'd have an actor on each side, and they just do the whole thing?
Or as many as 3 on each side.
As many as 3 on each side. Sound quality pretty good on this.
Oh, yes.
And what else do you have here?
This is a double button carbon.
Hold it up just a little bit more.
That's a double button carbon mic. It was carbon grains. It had a decent frequency response, but very noisy. Always had a loud hiss in the background. And then this is a later ribbon, one of the last ribbon mics they made. The ribbons were much more prone to accidents. The ribbon is a very light material, and if the wind blew hard on it or you blew into the mic, you could distort the ribbon and ruin the microphone. So it's too fragile to use today for general purposes.
What is the oldest microphone in your collection?
I've got an exact replica of the first telephone transmitter, which would be the first microphone, the first one that produced intelligible speech, and that was a liquid microphone that Bell invented.
And the most recent microphone in your collection?
I probably stop in the mid-50s.
In the mid-50s.
Right.
That's about when you started collecting, right? Early 1950 was when you started?
See, once you got past 31, everything pretty much stayed the same. Before, with these carbon microphones, the technology was different. You couldn't interchange mics, but today you can.
Now, when you started collecting microphones, were they easy to come by?
Not real easy, but a lot better than they are today.
Not anywhere near the number of microphones as there are the number of radio receivers, right?
That's for sure.
Yeah, and today it's very difficult to find a microphone.
Yes, but these were smaller items and they got thrown out. So they're around, but in fewer numbers.
I shudder to think that someone would throw out one of these microphones. That's terrible. Well, you have a great collection. In fact, you have a museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
That's right.
Now, where is that?
It's on First and National. The name of the building is Select Sound Service, and it's about 4 blocks north of the Ellen Bradley Tower, the big clock. So.
And is this open to the public?
Yes. I'm there every day. Anybody wants to see it comes in and asks for me, and I show them. But again, this is a specialty thing. This isn't something everybody'd want to see unless they're into radio or have used mics in their business. You know,
we're going to come up and visit you one day and see a lot of those microphones.
That'd be fine.
If you're looking for the super combination, super brands at super prices, come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances. It's spectacular. It's Townhouse's all-out rollout sale. Trainloads and truckloads of major appliances, color TVs, and VCRs are now arriving with the greatest selections and savings of the year. This week, save big on famous GE appliances, including GE microwaves. Don't miss it. Sale now in progress.
Come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances, Milwaukee and Oakton.
You'll find a generous helping of memories from and about the good old days at Metro Golden Memories in Chicago. We have a complete selection of records and cassette tapes from the fabulous big band era, plus thousands of personality recordings by your favorite singers. We offer a gigantic collection of books about the movies and the stars from those wonderful days of not so long ago. At Metro Golden Memories, you'll find a marvelous collection of celebrity statues, plus our famous Maltese Falcon replica, the Oscar look-alike, even Little Nipper, the RCA dog. Hundreds of old-time radio shows on record and tape, and lots of books about radio and television, too. Posters of your favorite movies and movie stars, and videotapes of the classic films from Hollywood's golden age. Hundreds in stock for sale or rent. All this and more at Metro Golden Memories, 5425 West Addison, just 2 miles west of the Kennedy Expressway in Chicago. Open 7 days a week, Monday through Saturday from 10 to 6, Sunday from noon to 5. Come in and browse.
Barry Janov is one of the founding members of the Antique Radio Club of Illinois, and he's, of course, out here at RadioFest 86 with his collection of radios, or a portion of it. And I want to ask you, Barry, what is the most prized possession you have among all of your radio receivers?
I would say my Atwater Kent number 5, which was one of the first production models, and there's very few of them around. In fact, I've had a number of people out here, knowing that I have one, inquiring whether I would want to part with it.
Would you want to part with it?
No. No, it's one of the few, if I ever cut down, that I would want to keep.
How many, I guess we always have to ask the collector, how many old radios do you have in your collection?
Well, I really would rather not say, because I really don't want my wife to find out.
I understand perfectly. Barry, who are the people who participate in these meets? Who are the collectors who are part of the membership of the club?
We have a lot of electrical engineers, a lot of old radio, TV repair people, antique people, and just from every walk of life, young, old. It's what makes, I think, the club so interesting, because we all get together and talk about radio. We have something in common, even though the rest of our lives may be quite different.
Well, what kind of people do you have? You say everybody's different. I know you are a professional man. You're a dentist. Now, there are other people who have other occupations. What might they be?
Well, we have a couple of physicians, several lawyers. We have people in the construction business, in the jewelry business, you name it. I think it just covers about everything that we have.
And the common bond is a love for these old radio receivers, right?
That's correct. It's the one thing that we have in common, and that's what's so great when we get together. We have something to talk about.
Barry, what kind of radio receivers are represented out here at the Radio Fest?
Well, the whole gamut of radios are here. We have some of the very early World War I and experimental receivers. Then we go into crystal sets, battery sets, the electrics when the cathedrals and some of the old consoles became very popular, and up to Bakelite and even some plastics that we see out here, which have become very popular lately.
I notice a bunch of plastic radios out here. Now, when I think of the radio era, I think of either the Cathedral radio or that Zenith console, you know. And yet there seem to be a lot of plastic and a lot of people interested in the plastic things. Is that because of the youth of the people collecting the radios, or the scarcity of the great cathedrals and floor models?
No, I think you hit on it the first time. I think most of the new collectors are collecting the plastics. They're really into that. They're younger, and they want something they can plug in the wall and that it works. We're finding some of the older sets, which were more scarce and several years ago were worth a lot of money, have come down in value because the older collectors generally have what they want, and the new collectors are looking for newer things that they can identify with. We can identify with the cathedral, that's what I see. But the newer collectors, many of them are younger, and they are into the Bakelite, the mirrored, the Art Deco type with chrome on them. So we're not seeing as much interest in some of the older battery sets, which are out here.
Barry, how did you get started? How did the radio collecting bug bite you?
Well, a number of years ago, I was out with my wife and some friends, and we were up in Loon Lake, Illinois, and these people were antique collectors. We had no interest in that. And so we wandered with them through a couple of antique shops, and lo and behold, there is this old floor model radio that I said, oh, I remember one just like this. And I asked them how much it was, and they said it was $12.50, and it was beautiful. And they said, and it worked too. So I said, I've got to have this. So I took it and brought it home. And that evening, some friends came over and said, oh, where did you get this radio? And I told them the story. And they said, well, how much did you pay? And I said, $12.50. They said, I'll give you $25. I had a feeling then I was on to something. And that was my first radio, which of course I still have.
Does a restored radio have as much value to a collector as an antique in its original condition? In other words, one that has been maybe stripped of its original finish and then sanded down and refinished. Is that worth as much to a collector as one in its original state, so to speak?
Well, to the purist, of which there are some, the answer is no. To many people that just want a few radios, they would prefer to have one that looks nice. I think the people that want the cathedrals and the floor models prefer to have them looking nice, working, and in good shape. To the purist who's the historian, I think he'd rather have it in original shape because of that's the way it was.
Even if original shape means a grill cloth is a little shabby, or there's a little mark or a chip or a dent or a bump or something like that on it.
That's correct. If it's not totally a basket case, I think he'd rather have it that way and just clean it up and make it look as good as he can, and yet keep the original finish and keep everything original on it.
Now, if someone comes out to RadioFest and they're not a big collector of radios, but they would like to have an individual radio, something to either reminisce about for their den or their rec room as a symbol of their enjoyment of the old-time radio shows or of a period of time, is this the place to find a radio like that?
Oh, sure. In fact, this is a place to find it, and find it reasonably, because there are more out here, and collectors will generally sell it for a lot less than you can find it in an antique shop. However, you have to be careful that it is working, if that's what you want, and that it is original, because you'll find them in every condition out here.
I've seen that. I've seen radios in every possible kind of condition out here, but how do you check that? How do you know? There's no electricity out here at the RadioFest flea market. How do you know if it's playable?
Generally, just ask the people. The people here generally are very helpful, very honest. It's part of our club, and they will tell you if it's working or not, or if it's just working fairly. So you can ask them, and then of course you can take it in and plug it in if you want to try it.
So inside the Holiday Inn, you mean? So that there's no chicanery going on around here.
Well, hopefully not.
You know, I have to ask you, how much of your spare time is spent in collecting and dealing with antique radios?
With this meet, a lot of it was taken, but it's something that varies greatly. But I do get calls and spend some time going out and looking at things, and I never really figured it in hours because it's just a lot of fun.
If you're looking for the super combination, super brands at super prices, come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances. It's spectacular. It's Townhouse's all-out rollout sale. Trainloads and truckloads of major appliances, color TVs, and VCRs are now arriving with the greatest selections and savings of the year. This week, save big on Zenith color TVs and Zenith video recorders. Don't miss it. Sale now in progress.
Come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances, Milwaukee and Oakton.
The Mysterious Traveler.
The Jimmy Durante Show.
X, minus, one.
Fibber McGee and Molly. The Amos and Andy Show.
Suspense.
Town Hall Tonight. Philco Radio Time.
The Tom Mix Boston Straight Shooters.
The Guiding Light. Can you top this?
On orbit. Space Cadet.
Henry Aldrich. Coming, Mother.
True Detective Mystery.
Well, if you think you've seen radios so far, as Al Jolson said, you ain't seen nothing yet. We've been out at the flea market at RadioFest 86 with the Antique Radio Club of Illinois, but now we're back at Dr. Muckow's Antique Radio Museum in Elgin, Illinois. Dr. Muckow is the curator and owner of this private radio collection. He's a member of the Antique Radio Club of Illinois, a member of the Antique Wireless Association, and of the Antique Radio Club of America. He's with us here, and he's going to treat us to a fantastic tour of this fantastic museum. Doctor, why do you collect radios?
Chuck, ever since I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I had an interest in radio. It's fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, that I'm old enough to have been around at the beginning of radio. And when it was first started, I did get interested in the wireless experiments that were being done, and I started to build crystal sets. These were usually something that I got out of Boy's Life magazine or Popular Science or Popular Mechanics magazine, and I would make them up at home, and I got interested in radio. So as I grew and advanced through school, I continued to my experiments with radio, and actually became a, shall we say, self-taught. I don't call myself a radio expert, but at least I learned how to deal with and service radio sets. So my interest in radio has stemmed back from the time of my childhood.
But at the time you were listening to radio and building some radio receivers, you weren't really collecting radios to build a collection at that time, were you?
No, that's true. The collecting aspect of the radios did not take place until 1967 with me. My interest in radio had continued ever since I was a youngster, and I'd followed it right along, its development, its technology, and so on. But in 1967, my two sons both were off to college. At that time, previous to that, I should say, I was doing things with them. When they left for school, I needed to revert to some sort of a hobby for myself. And I just happened to stumble on a couple of old sets in an antique shop and decided I'd like to try to make them function. So I took them home, serviced them, made them work, and tried to look for more. Pretty soon the bug had bitten, and I decided that I was going to see if I couldn't get more interesting and different radios. So I, from that time forward, became a collector. That's how it actually started.
One of the collectors we spoke with before said that a problem with collecting radios is space. Now it appears, Doctor, that you have solved that problem by having your own museum. How much space do you have?
Well, of course, what I have in the collection, and to our knowledge, it is probably the largest private collection in the world of working, functioning historical sets. It probably engrosses almost 3,000 radios and transmitters and accessories. At first, of course, the place for my radios was the basement at home. And the basement became, well, shall we say, cluttered with radios. It was hard to keep them in a logical sequence. You couldn't display them well, and other collectors coming to see them would not be able to climb over everything to see what was going on. I was having a little problem with my wife, too. as far as utilizing so much space was concerned. So I was fortunate in having my own office building where my dental practice was established, and I was able to, when some of my tenants moved out, I was able to get the sudden thought that, my goodness, that's where the radios belong, because there I'm not only with them all day, but I have my burglar alarms and fire alarms to protect them. My maintenance man lives in back of the building. If I have time between patients, I can go up and talk to them. So this was the logical place to start the museum, was in my office building, which I was fortunate enough to have. So that's what I've done. I do have other sets which are not on display that I have warehoused in my garage and in my basement at home too. But each year I seem to be able to enlarge by adding more space in the building to the museum, and I can spread into that area.
So when you're not working on your patients, you're working on your
You got it.
Your radio.
That's exactly right, and that's the way I've done it. I do all my own servicing and my own restorations, and I do it as a hobby. It's a great release for me to do it from the pressures of the dental practice.
You have quite a few rooms, 8 to 10 rooms here, filled with receivers and senders and headsets and microphones and everything else. How far back do you go with all of these things?
Well, actually, Chuck, I try to make my museum as complete I can as a history of wireless and radio. So I go back to the time of Marconi, which is right around 1900, and we go right up to television. I try to limit it to prior to World War II, if I possibly can, but in some cases there are a few things that overlap. If they're unique enough, I will collect them even if they're later. But I try to keep it prior to World War II. And you mentioned the rooms. There actually are 12 rooms that we counted here of things that do show the history, and we try to keep it in a chronological way so that it means something. It isn't just a matter of putting a radio on a shelf. You have to try to make it tell a story as you go along.
I notice that you have one room that is almost totally filled with Atwater Kent radios and material, and another that is dominated by tubes, and another with speakers. How much depth do you have in all of these things?
Well, of course, this is the way that you can display it the best. Atwater Kent interested me in the beginning because of the fact that his radios were so beautifully constructed and so early. He was actually the Cadillac of radios in the 20s. And his radios, even today, when found, will usually play without too much effort, showing the quality that he put into those things. And he just would not cut costs at all in his manufacture. So I have specialized in Atwater Kent. As if you want to put it that way, it is the one category that I have tried, and what I'm trying to do is get an example of every model that he made, all the way up to the time of his retirement in 1936.
And novelty radios. My goodness, I've seen every conceivable kind of novelty radio here.
Yes, people were, of course, very interested in novelty sets of any kind, and of course they usually utilize the favorite, well, we'll say, entertainment personalities. You would have a Charlie McCarthy radio, you'd have a Hopalong Cassidy radio, you could have the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs radio, the Diane Quintuplets radio. In other words, anything that was popular at the time was used in making novelty radios. Then, of course, they made them of whiskey bottles. They made them of ashtrays. They just tried everything in order to make and they still do, even with your present-day transistor radios today. There are novelty radios all over.
Well, you see people walking around with a Cubs radio on their
exactly.
Now, right?
Very interesting, too. That's a very interesting radio, that little one. Yes, it is. We've taken that apart and analyzed it, and it's a very intriguing circuit.
Are you collecting current radios like that?
No, I do not. No, if there's, I do have a Cubs radio. Simply one reason is because my museum and my office are next door to the Burger King here across the parking lot. But I do not collect transistor radios as such, no.
As you said, your radio collection, as far as your specific interest is concerned, it goes to about the end of World War II.
Should end about the end of the war, right.
Well, what you have here, Doctor, is amazing, and if we could, we'd love to take a tour of your museum.
Certainly. Enjoy it.
If you're looking for the super combination, super brands at super prices, come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances. It's spectacular. It's Townhouse's all-out rollout sale. Trainloads and truckloads of major appliances, color TVs, and VCRs are now arriving with the greatest selections and savings of the year. This week, save big on Zenith color TVs and Zenith video recorders. Don't miss it. Sale now in progress.
Come to the Superstore, Townhouse TV and Appliances, Milwaukee and Oakton.
It's one small step for man.
Share the experience.
The candidates need
and
to
unlock the memories at Chicago's Museum of Broadcast Communications.
For the latest local results.
Celebrating the very best in radio, television, and advertising. For membership information, call 565-1950. Chicago's new Museum of Broadcast Communications. Come, share the experience.
Howdy, folks. Gabby Hayes here from Metro Golden Memories, where you'll find the largest collection of old-time memories in the Midwest. Why, they've got records, tapes, photos, posters, and all kinds of memorabilia from and about the good old days of movies, radio, and television.
You'll find me and my piano at Metro Golden Memories and 1,000 gift items under $10 each. Oh, I'm so excited to be at Metro Golden Memories, so please come in and browse around. That's Metro Golden Memories.
Folks, everything you've always wanted to remember but didn't know where to find is at Metro Golden Memories.
That's right, Jimmy. They even have pictures of me, Rocky, at Metro Golden Memories.
So come in and let us make you an offer you can't refuse at Metro Golden Memories in Chicago.
We're going to begin our tour of Dr. Ralph Muckow's Antique Radio Museum in this little corner with this big speaker. Doctor, what is this speaker?
This is a loudspeaker, Chuck, that was designed to be used with a battery receiver, battery-powered, dates to 1925, 1926, made by the Timmons Company, and is actually a cone made of actually paper, a heavy paper, not cloth, not fabric, and could be connected directly to the set. It has nothing to do with this radio, whatever below it.
Well, this radio is, this looks a little more modern than some of the early Atwater Kents I've seen.
This is extremely unique. This is a Atwater Kent 2-pneumatic, which was built in 1935. And it was Atwater Kent's early version of a programmed radio. In other words, the owner could, with pencil, place the call letters of his stations on these little placards, and then program the whole day following with whatever programs he wanted to hear. If he wanted to hear this station, he would pull out this at, if say the program was at 4 o'clock, he would plug this in at 4 o'clock. If he wanted to hear this station at 1 o'clock, he'd go around this way and plug it in at 1 o'clock. You can imagine what a serviceman's nightmare this would be to repair, because each of these is on a coiled spring and of course was subject to being pulled on by children or anyone else. 3 o'clock for this station, we would plug it in at 3 o'clock. So when all the cords were plugged in, you could turn the radio on and automatically all day long your programs would come in as you wished.
Now that's on for a 12-hour period then?
That's right.
What about daylight time? No, not daylight time?
That would make no difference.
That's amazing.
You'd have to reset your clock then.
Gee, that's incredible. This is a beautiful piece. This looks, it almost looks like it's a restored piece.
No, this is actually an original finish. The only part that was restored was the top, because some people had put some water glasses on here. But the rest is all original finish, the whole thing.
Now this is a rather early, well, it's a late piece, I suppose.
This is one of the latest, as a matter of fact, of the Atwater Kents, because he went out of business in 1936.
Well, you have a whole room filled with Atwater Kent things, and I think we ought to take a look at that.
Fine.
You really have almost the whole collection, don't you?
I'm trying to get all of them, a model of each, or it's just an example of each model he made, Chuck, right up until the time he closed in 1936. But Atwater Kent was the Cadillac of radios in the 20s, and made absolutely beautiful, gorgeous equipment and extremely high quality. And as I mentioned earlier, today if you find an Atwater Kent radio, you usually have very little trouble making it play, making it function. That's how well he made his things. He started out making all his sets on boards, And just as you can see on the Atwater Kent shelves, the board sets were laid out on a regular mahogany board with all of the components on the top, making it very easy to service the set. The wiring was underneath the board, and Atwater Kent never wanted to have anything but board sets. But of course, dusting these radios was impossible, because if you tried to, you might break a tube. And of course, back in those days, a tube would cost $10, and $10, as you know, was a lot of money for a tube when you consider what it was worth at that time. Since the board sets were not popular with particularly the ladies of the house, Atwater Kent decided that he had to put them in cabinets.
Because they didn't want to do all that extra dusting.
That's right, and they couldn't do it without jeopardizing the tubes. So he did hire furniture factories to make the cabinets for him out of beautiful woods and beautiful cabinets. And he started out with the sets that you see up on the shelf that have regular box-like shapes to them. And then, of course, he went to the larger cabinets, including the consoles, including beautiful consoles like we have showing you here in the, or like I'm showing you here in this room. And until actually he closed until 1936, Atwater Kent was always regarded as one of the finest radio manufacturers in the world. As a matter of fact, in 1929 he was making 12,000 radio sets a day in a factory that had 32 acres of floor space.
12,000 a day?
12,000 per day in 1929.
And he was out of business by the end of 35?
By 36. By 36.
Why did he go out of business?
He went out of business because mainly two things. He was in the middle of a very bad depression, and the other radio companies were cutting their quality and costs way down. As a result, his sets, which he would not cut quality on, had to remain at a certain figure.
Well, he brought the good times of radio to a lot of people with those great receivers.
He made beautiful, beautiful sets, and they are, even to this day, are regarded as some of the finest that were ever made.
Well, I think I've died and gone to radio heaven in this room in your museum, Doctor, with all of these cathedral and tombstone radios. This, for me, is the symbol of the golden days of radio.
Well, Chuck, these sets were what we collectors call the workhorses of the 30s, because that's when they first came out with what the manufacturers like to call midget sets. Some of them weighed 80 pounds, but they still call them midget sets. And certainly the cathedral shape and the tombstone, as we call it, shape are the ones that we see now were used so much back in the mid-30s.
When were the first cathedrals, when did they first start out?
Well, actually, the first cathedral was 1925.
25?
That was a set that we have on the floor here in this room, which was a battery receiver, but it was the first cathedral-shaped radio. Therefore, we call it the first cathedral.
But the first wooden
ones? The first wooden ones that plugged in the wall were actually around 1930.
And
That's about when they started.
Was the last one? When was the last cathedral that they built?
Oh, last cathedrals probably lasted until, I'd say probably 1935, 36. That was about it. From then on, they went into the little rectangular, so-called table sets.
And how many of these wooden radios do you have? My gosh, you've got every conceivable shape and style.
Oh, I probably must have in cathedrals and radios, or in cathedrals and the tombstones, I would say probably about 150.
Oh, I know people would give their right arm to get one cathedral, and you've got 150 of them sitting around you. Oh, they're beautiful. Absolutely beautiful radios, and perfect grill cloths. So many of the grill cloths are in perfect shape on them, too.
Most of them are original grill cloths, too.
I've seen, go to a flea market someplace or an antique show or an antique store. You'll find one in deplorable shape, and the grill cloth is all beaten up and torn apart and everything else. But you've done a marvelous job of preserving these things, and in some cases, I guess, restoring and bringing them.
If you have to, yes, indeed, sure.
How have you found all of these radios over the years? Where did you get them?
Well, of course, starting out, as I mentioned before, I started in 1967, which was a time when people were not interested in antiques per se. As a matter of fact, many times you would find things on the tree bank waiting for the rubbish man to come and pick them up. If I would tell all my patients about the fact that I was interested in the old radios, and sometimes a patient would walk in with a package under their arm or a bag full of tubes or something of that sort. Or they'd tell me that Uncle Joe had something in his barn with the pigeons, and that's where I'd go and get that set. And then, of course, I did travel all around to the small cities around Elgin here, and would try to seek out any of the old radio men, hams, servicemen, and usually those fellows would have things in their garages or in their barns. And at that time, as I say, there wasn't the interest that there is now. So I might come home at the end of the day with 25 radios, and maybe 20 of them were given to me for nothing, you know, at the time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, you've, you know, you give back because you restore these things, you get them working, and this is just, as I say, it's a great place to be. Nice room here.
It's as we mentioned before, it's a labor of love for me, and I really have enjoyed it, working with it. And I'm still collecting. I haven't stopped collecting.
The patients to your dental practice still come in with a radio under their arm?
Not very much anymore, but I'm still asking them to.
And they say they want to keep it for themselves now, huh?
Well, most of the people do call up now are not offering me a radio for the collection. They're more interested in making it work and put it in their recreation room or something of that sort.
Neatly tucked away amongst all of the antique radios here at Dr. Muckow's museum are a few Victrolas and phonographs. Don't tell me, Doctor, that you're starting a collection of Victrolas now.
No, indeed, Chuck. These are not one of my, shall we say, fortes in collecting, but I do have a few machines around for because of the fact that they're contemporary with some of the radios. And they were early pieces, and of course they had some of the same horn type of reproducers. Now, in this particular instance, the Victor Talking Machine Company made the typical Victrola, which most people are familiar with, and this one had only a horn going from here to here, just a span of about 1.5 feet. And of course this is the way that sounded. Now, the Victor Talking Machine Company was so enthusiastic about their acoustical machine that in 1927, when the electrical machines came out, electric record players with tubes that you plugged in the wall, they were going to be put out of business because this is all they had. So they decided that they would go to what they called a super Victrola, which they called the orthophonic Victrola. And in this particular instance, they took the 18-inch horn and coiled it like a snail all the way down, making it, and a 15-foot horn collapsed into this area. Then they found that this is the way it sounded with that big horn. Much louder, much clearer, however, very expensive, and the people figured it was easier to flip a switch on and off, so this only lasted for 1 year.
Well, Doctor, where are we now in your fantastic museum?
Well, Chuck, we now are at one part of the museum that is one of my favorites. And the reason is because the equipment in this particular area is all extremely early. As a matter of fact, most of the radios and sets that are in this bank up here are of World War I vintage or before, or shortly thereafter. All of them what we call pre-broadcast. In other words, the first commercial broadcast as such we know from your history is 1920, November of 1920. So anything that was up here was all used by amateurs, hams, or by the services. Now, a lot of these sets are from shipboard, they're submarine receivers, they're used on cruisers, and some of them even in aircraft. The picture of Marconi in back of me, of course, is the man that most people feel invented radio. Actually, that is not true, and Marconi never claimed to have invented radio. He simply took the results of many experimenters before and with him and put them all together and made the thing gel, and with his financial backing was given credit for developing radio, and that's what he actually said he did, was he developed radio. He did not invent radio. Now, several of the important manufacturers in the early days of radio, many people will remember, Crosley was one of them. Now, Powell Crosley Jr. was the one that developed the Crosley Station and the Crosley Company in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he was the one that built Crosley Field for the Cincinnati Reds, and he also developed the Crosley car, the Crosley Shelvador refrigerator, and was a very, very enthusiastic promoter.
We've seen an awful lot of unusual radios here at Dr. Ralph Muckow's Museum of Antique Radios, but this is taking the cake. This is one of the most unusual radios I've ever seen.
Chuck, this is one of the most unusual radios I've ever seen, too, and it is very unique. The set was built by the Electric Radio Clock Fountain Company in Irvington, New Jersey in 1932, and apparently was designed to be used in a men's club foyer, to be used in perhaps a theater foyer, to be used perhaps in the home of a wealthy entertainer in California. But the radio itself is an Atwater Kent Model 90, which was made in 1932 also. And the radio, or I should say the fountain itself, has its own self-contained pump which keeps the fountain running, and it doubles as a fountain radio and also as a humidifier. It certainly is, as I said, one of the most unusual sets I've ever found.
I have never seen anything like it. And it really, though it has an Atwater Kent radio in here, it was not manufactured by Atwater Kent. In other words, these
only
people,
the radio portion. Only the radio.
So these people who manufactured this whole package here got the radio parts, so to speak, or the radio receiver from Atwater Kent, and built it into this.
That's
right?
correct. As a matter of fact, I really feel that this is a custom type of radio, and you would order it with whatever brand of radio you wanted in it.
Oh, I see.
This particular one happens to have the Atwater Kent 90 in it.
This has been a small company, but they're doing a job with this.
Well, it certainly is an unusual piece.
Well, we've been in good company today with you, going through your priceless antique radio museum. Like this fountain radio, all of the radios we've seen in your museum, they all work, they're all operable. They all are in tremendous shape, and you've done a magnificent job of preserving these things, collecting them, and getting a lot of documentation about it. I want to congratulate you for that, Doctor.
Thank you, Chuck. I've certainly
job.
I've made an effort to do just exactly what
It's a labor of love, isn't it?
Oh, a labor of love is what it takes.
Well, we love you for doing it. We appreciate that. You've really done a marvelous job with it, and we also thank you very much for letting us spend some time. And we're privileged, we know, because the museum is a private museum. It's not open to the public except on very special events or by special appointment. So we're glad to have been able to be here today.
Very happy to have you, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. And we've talked so much about old radios, antique radios today. We said earlier that if you'd like some more information about joining the Antique Radio Club of Illinois, all you have to do is drop a note to Joe Willis. He's the president of the club. And you can write to him at Post Office Box 14732 in Chicago, Illinois at 60614. And they'll be glad to send you some information about this club and about collecting radios, about when the next meet is going to be, and so forth and so on. And in the meantime, we want to thank you for joining us on Chuck Shaden's Nostalgia today. We'll see you next time.